don't know whether to laugh or cry. So I think I just want to update the world in case they missed out on this hysterical and sad moment when one of the leading countries in the world, one of the greatest countries in terms of statistics and its development, um, has sort of fallen on its face recently in terms of the way they're tracking COVID. I'm speaking of the sort of well documented mess that happened with COVID tracking in the UK. Now, what's funny here to me is that they were using an inappropriate tool. They were using Microsoft Excel to try and deal with big data. And what's tragic is that when they saw it wasn't working, they decided to just use more Microsoft Excel. I mean, like, are they assuming that if you simply apply more of a solution that doesn't work, you somehow solve the problem? Sometimes that works. I mean, that's the basis for a lot of orthopedics procedures, for as much as I can tell. Like, if it doesn't work with force, just use more force, right? But this isn't that kind of problem. This is a big data kind of problem, and nobody in their right mind handles big data on Microsoft Excel and Windows and this silly little Mickey Mouse world that Microsoft created, which really might be more appropriate to home computers. And certainly, empirically, what we see is that when people have to deal with really big data, they use, um, Linux-based setups, SQL servers, and crunch through their numbers in CSV files. That's just the way it is because it works. When Microsoft won't, which is when you get above a certain amount of data, which I believe I mentioned in another short I made. So to celebrate all of this and the upcoming World Statistics Day, I am going to show you a Jupyter notebook I made. I will share my screen here. Let's see. Yeah. Because I want to show, how simple this is. This is something I made on a Saturday morning when my kid was asleep because I had some questions about COVID that I couldn't find quickly in the media. So I found who had the data, right? People in Europe are keeping data. So if you import the correct libraries, you're looking at my screen, I assume, and you take the data from these lovely people over at Our World of Data. There's a CSV, and you can take a look at it. What they have is countries and then, reported cases by date, essentially. And they have some other interesting data. But when you run this data, what you'll see is data that you can actually work with as a CSV, which is the way to work with data like this. I'm not claiming you have to use Python. Perhaps you're better in R. Perhaps you're one of these brilliant programmers that can, make it fly by itself in Julia, which is a language I don't code in. I just code in plain old Python. And yet, I know enough not to think the solution is Microsoft Excel. Why? Because when you have this much data, it's not the solution. So, look, I check my data on the CSV. There are no duplicated rows. So I transpose the data there. And then I can start to do interesting things with it. So I'm checking about some numbers, okay? And just sort of flipping the data around. And then, of course, I have to kind of control and clean up the data, right? Sometimes the data is going to come in such a format where it's not going to mesh with my libraries, right? So sometimes I'm going to have to replace where in the data it says one name for a country with another name for a country, because in the future in some library I have, the country's only named in one way, right? So, it always does take a little bit of looking and cleaning up your data, but once you've got the data, you can run it and look, at things like how many deaths you have very quickly. Now, I made this notebook a few months ago, and apparently they haven't changed the format of the data because it still sort of runs. Okay. And you know, it's online, anyone can use it and generate maps from it. Maps, now these maps, I do not suspect these maps to actually show what's going on very well because there's an incredible bias in what's reported, right? However, when I look at these maps, you know, and I believe my code generates quite a few. I can normalize them by the population in the country. I can normalize them by the number of tests done in the country. I can do all sorts of statistical tricks very quickly. I also set up the notebook so that you can query it about your country. It will check in the code if you have put in a name of the country it doesn't understand. Oh, this map looks kind of sad. I'm kind of worried about the United States. Uh, that's normalized. Oh, maybe it's not so bad, right? Well, go to the notebook. I will leave the link in and play away. And as you play away, think for a second that sometimes the combined intelligence of the most intelligent people in one of the most advanced countries lands people working with Excel spreadsheets, which I'm sorry to say are sort of like trying to take kindergarten blocks and okay, wait, asterisk. No offense meant to kindergarten blocks, none whatsoever. In fact, I mean, if you think about it, these kindergarten blocks probably came from a factory where they keep a lot of data on a Linux machine. And then they use the proper tools to monitor the quality of them. Because, you know, that's what factories in industrialized countries typically do. And that is why these businesses typically will employ statisticians or engineers who know how to work with big data, unlike, I guess, the people in charge of our lives who are supposedly running public health and yet keep running the statistics on tools like Microsoft Excel. I don't know. Whatevs.